This Gripe to Gold process is really concerned with understanding how an empowering conversation works. And it's rooted in the understanding in any situation, the self is always encapsulated by the other. And in any situation, you can either construct your intent in what you're getting, or you can construct your intent in what you're giving. Now, when one constructs one's intent in what one's getting, in other words, what's being done to you, if you base your intent on what you're getting from somebody else, that person's ability to withhold what you want gives them power over you. In other words, you become weak. And not only do you become weak, but you therefore have a sense of victimhood because the other has power over the self. Whereas if you construct your intent on what you're giving, because you've always got control over what you're giving, you become powerful. And you have a sense of mastery or autonomy, a sense of mastery of your destiny. Now, what's true for most corporate organizations is that just because of their brute size, they always create the condition where the individual feels small. So it's very quick for individuals in corporates to experience themselves to be victims. But not just that, also because organizations, corporates are so incredibly results focused, they produce victims. And the reason for this is a result is something that you get. So if you focus people's attention on what you're getting, they will then start to feel like they have no control or autonomy. They will start feeling like victims, and they will gripe. And this tendency to gripe is a really common feature in corporate life. The role of the leader is to help somebody to turn their gripe into a goal. Because the moment you've shifted your attention from a gripe to a goal, you've actually shifted your attention from what's being done to you to what you should personally do or give. That is truly empowering. And what's very important about the shift from a gripe to a goal is that when you get that right, you're basically shifting somebody's attention from the past. Because if I have a gripe, I'm looking at what's being done to me, to the future, to what I can do myself. In other words, what I'm trying to achieve, the goal I'm trying to achieve. Further to this, when I look at what's being done to me, I'm kind of, in a sense, I'm saying the other defines me, which basically means to say I stagnate and I get stuck. Whereas when I look at what I'm doing myself, I become the definer. When I'm looking at what's being done to me, I'm basically saying I'm not accountable because whatever's going on is in the hands of somebody else. It's their fault. Whereas if I'm looking at what I'm doing myself, I become accountable. This means that the deliverable of the Gripe to Gold process isn't to solve problems. The Gripe to Gold process is concerned with cultivating accountability. It's about taking somebody who's looking at a situation from a point of view that's making them feel like a victim and shifting their way of looking at the things so that they become accountable. They feel like a master. It also is the mechanism whereby people grow, because when I have a gripe, when I'm looking at the past, I'm looking at what I know, at the known. Whereas the moment I turn my attention to the future is unknown. When I'm looking at the known, I'm basically focusing on what's secure, on what's the same. Whereas as soon as I'm engaging the future, I'm basically beginning to take a risk myself. In other words, when you help somebody to shift from looking at a situation that they're in from having a gripe to having a goal, you actually cultivate a sense of mastery with that person. You cultivate a sense of accountability. You get the person to start taking some real risks in terms of their own life. From one point of view, the shift is incredibly simple. It is literally taking a statement that sounds like a gripe and flipping on its head to sound like a goal. So I'll give you an example. Let's say, for instance, my gripe is that I'm losing my marriage. So what would my goal be? My goal would be to save the marriage. So my gripe is I'm losing my marriage. I want to save the marriage. A second example is I don't have enough money. What do I want to do? I want to get more money. So the essence of this Gripe to Gold process is incredibly simple. It's really about taking something that's phrased as a gripe and to flip it on its head to sound like a goal. And the process that you go through is a 4-step process. The first step is listening. The second step is phrasing the goal. The third step is brainstorm rather, and the fourth step is commitment. Now, this first step, this listening step, has the following associated with it. The aim of the listening part of the conversation is to identify the root cause of the problem. And the rule here is to be patient. It is rare that when a person comes to you with a problem, they walk into your office, that they've thought through the problem. It's more likely that they don't quite understand what the issue is, and they need some airtime to be able to speak through the issue. I mean, metaphorically, it's like the person has a discomfort in their shoe, but they don't know what the stone that's in their shoe looks like. So you need to, in a sense, take the time, stop, allow the person to unpack. This first part of the conversation, the listening part of the conversation, is the longest part of the conversation. There's a lot of text here, if you like. Listen, listen, listen. And there's some process rules to help us here. The first is to seek to understand, not to be understood. The more you're trying to you find yourself wanting to explain something, you're no longer listening. So shut up. Listen, listen, listen. Another way of dealing with this listening part of the conversation is to ask the 5 whys. In other words, use the 3-year-old method, which kind of tests the griper's patience a little bit, but it is useful in trying to understand root causes. You can also be more sophisticated by using this sort of Rogerian technique, by saying things like, so you're saying that, or so you feel that, or so you think that. In a sense, you're reflecting back to them what they're saying. But the usefulness of that reflection is that they can now see what they're saying. They feel heard. And secondly, it gives them an opportunity to clarify. What's important with this rephrasing is that you don't necessarily just rephrase content. I mean, this first statement, so you're saying that, that is rephrasing content. It's saying back to the person what they said to you, literally almost verbatim. But the second statement, so you feel that, you reflect back to the person feeling. So for instance, you ask the person, how are you today? And they say, fine. Clearly they're not fine. So when you reflect back to them, it's quite legitimate for you to say, it seems like you feel a little bit irritated or whatever. So you don't just reflect back content, what the things that they're actually saying, but how they seem to be feeling and what they seem to be thinking about the matter. So however you do this first part of the conversation, the listening part of the conversation, the aim of the listening part of the conversation is a clearly defined problem statement, a clearly defined gripe statement. What you then do with that gripe statement is you take that statement and flip it on its head to sound like a goal. So that's the second part of the conversation. The second part of the conversation is about phrasing the goal. The aim of phrasing the goal is literally to flip the attention forward. And what you'll notice, for instance, even in the 2 examples that we had before, when we looked at this, I'm losing my marriage, I want to save my marriage, I don't have enough money, I want to get more money. When you make a statement like that, you're basically phrasing back to the person exactly what they said, but you're just flipping their attention forward. In other words, the rule here is no new content. The second part of the process is very short. It's almost like just a punctuation point. So exactly the same content that's phrased as a gripe should be phrased as a goal. Once you have this goal defined, the next step is to basically identify an action plan or establish an action plan whereby the person can achieve the goal. And we call that part of the process the brainstorm. The first rule of a good brainstorm is have an open mind. Don't be too prescriptive about what the person could possibly do. And that's what we mean by cooking a generous stew. In other words, have a big pot, metaphorically, and put as many ideas into the pot as you can in order to save this marriage. Or in order to achieve the goal. So let's say, for instance, we're dealing with this marriage problem. The person says, I'm losing my marriage, I want to save my marriage. So, well, what are all the things you could do to save the marriage? You can stop drinking. You can maybe spend more time at home. You can bring your wife flowers. You can go out on a date night. Maybe you should, leave your mistress. All of these things. At some point, you'd get to a point where you think, well, there's no other thing we can think of that you could conceivably do to fix this marriage. So you've got, the pot is now full. You've cooked a generous stew. What you then do is you take the useless or dangerous ideas out of the pot. So to save the marriage, you say, what are the things that you said is stop drinking? Well, actually, I am a confirmed alcoholic. I'm not going to stop drinking. So that's not feasible. You take the unfeasible things for the person out. And that person is then left with a residue. And each one of the things that are left are things that they can personally do to achieve the goal. You then take the things that are left and you sequence them into an action plan. So the product of the brainstorm is a clear action plan whereby the person can achieve their goal. Once you've got this action plan established, the next step then is to commit. The aim is to establish clear accountability. And you do this by getting a clear decision, by getting the person either to accept or reject the action plan. Now, for instance, let's say, we're dealing with a person who says, I'm losing my marriage, I want to save the marriage. So, well, what are all the things you could conceivably do to save this marriage? Leave the girlfriend, stop drinking, give my wife, stop drinking, we took out, but buy my wife flowers, have a date night, spend more time at home on the weekends. And the person thinks through this, and you say to the person, is it worth your while to do these things to achieve your goal? Now, let's assume the person says, I'm not going to leave my girlfriend, you're out of your mind. In other words, one of these things isn't worthwhile. The person doesn't think this action plan is doable. The question is, if the person rejects the action plan, has the process failed? And actually, the process has not failed. Because what you've done is you've indicated to the person the price they have to pay in order to achieve the goal they want. They themselves have decided they're not willing to pay that price. They are therefore accountable for the situation that they're in. And there's like a toughness of mind that underlies the ability to use this process well by the person who's leading the conversation. You have to understand, folks, that there's absolutely nothing, there's no situation a human being can't get out of. There's only such a thing as a price a human being is not willing to pay. So if the person says, I'm not willing to pay this price of leaving my girlfriend to save the marriage, then no longer complain about the loss of the marriage. Remember, as we indicated before, what you're trying to do with this particular piece of process is you're not trying to solve a problem, you're trying to cultivate accountability. So just the last point about this is these four, almost a rhythm to these four phases. The first phase, the listening phase, is long, takes a lot of time. The second phase, the phrasing of the goal phase, is short. It's almost like a punctuation point. The brainstorm is long, possibly not as long as the listening, but it's long. The commitment, again, is short. It's literally a punctuation point, maximum 1 or 2 statements. This example of the loss of the marriage that I used to explain the gripe to goal process might cause a little bit of disturbance. This idea that it doesn't occur to the person that maybe they shouldn't leave the girlfriend and maybe they should stop drinking. But I'd like to tease 2 points out of this. The first is, when you do a gripe to goal process, don't be invested in the outcome. And that's really what that particular example demonstrates for me. Follow the process. You're not there to solve the person's problem. You're there to cultivate a sense of accountability. The second thing is, the process doesn't give you a license to moralize. What your views is as to whether the person should have a girlfriend or not is completely irrelevant. Further to this, I'd like to point out that there's a video following after this, which indicates exactly what a gripe to goal conversation really looks like. Thank you very much.